Hey there drone fans, Rick here again from Drone Valley. In today's video, I'll show you a secret capability that you may not know about that DJI has been engineering into their drones for the last couple of years, but aren't really talking about a lot here in the United States, and probably for good reason. Now before I get too deep into what this technology provides, I want to mention that I've known about it for a couple of years, I've been following it pretty closely, and it's been released for a couple of the drones that are out there in the market today from DJI. And the reason I haven't discussed it on the channel is I've always viewed it as sort of an add-on or a hack or a region-specific solution, and I'm not a big fan of modifying the drones that come from DJI because I trust that the brilliant engineers from that company have designed a drone that's rock solid up in the air, that gives me good connection, that delivers beautiful video, and if I get in there and start tweaking it, I'm worried I'm going to damage something that's going to affect the way it flies, so I've left it alone. That all changes with the Air 3 because the technology I'm talking about and these capabilities are designed into the core of what the Air 3 provides. It's just not available here in the US yet. And I say yet because I think the limitations on why we don't have it have more to do with technology, regulations, politics, all the things that make it really difficult to have fun with a drone in the US. So let me tell you how I uncovered it in the Air 3 and why it changes things. So as a nerd, I fly a lot of different drones. And whenever a drone shows up, I spend a lot of time analyzing what's changed from the last model to the new model. So when the Air 2S was out, I looked at that, looked at the Air 3. I noticed some changes in the engineering and some of the casings and how it flies. The aerodynamics are completely different. The sensors are different. And one thing I noticed, which was interesting to me, was this seam right here on the top of the drone. And I thought to myself, all the other drones that I've taken apart, the top part of the casing pops off the drone. A couple of screws and it pops off. Now, I'm not recommending you take it apart because some of the cases actually have thermal paste on them that when you pull them off the printed circuit boards, you've got to put thermal paste on them to put them back in for the heat dissipation. But in this case, I noticed this seam right here and I thought to myself, well, that's really interesting. Why would you separate that piece of the case from the rest of the top? And again, you probably don't think through this like I do, but I spent a lot of time looking at these drones and that bothered me. That really bothered me. So then I popped out the battery and guess what I found? Inside the case right here are two tiny Phillips head screws. Now you can't get them out with a regular screwdriver, so I broke out my Drone Valley 48-piece screwdriver set and I found the right size Phillips and took those two screws out. And guess what happened? This top door popped off. And what's underneath there? A trunk. There's a trunk underneath there. There's a space inside the drone. And you're probably thinking, well, what's that all about? Why would the team at DJI spend time engineering money, molds, and everything else to design a little cavity inside the top of the drone? Then if you look closer, there's a USB-C connection on the back. And what are these things poking out right here? Those are antenna connections. So I started thinking about it a little bit more. And if you're wondering where this ends up, DJI for a couple of generations now has produced a network dongle that connects up to cellular networks. And you can buy that in other countries. You can attach it to some of the mini drones. You could attach it to some of the Mavic drones. But it's always been an external thing that had a plug in somewhere and had this bracket outside the drone, which I'm sure affected the aerodynamics of the drone and everything else. But the intent behind what that does for you is it extends your distance of flight. Because Wi-Fi technology, as brilliant as DJI is with all their OcuSync technologies, has a limited signal distance because the FCC in the United States limits how powerful that Wi-Fi signal can be. Well, if you can connect to a cellular network, you're going to touch a tower just like you do on your phone. You could fly forever. You could fly for as long as the battery will hold out. Now, again, I'd mentioned regulatory, political, technological. The reason we don't have this in the States, in my opinion, a couple of things. Number one, we're one of the few countries on the planet that has two different cellular types. There's two different brands of cellular signals that come in. That's why if you're on AT&T, it's different than Verizon. Verizon's different than AT&T, and never the twain shall meet. So there's competition in that space, which means if I put a dongle in here, I'm now beholden to that phone company. Okay, so that's the first part. Dongle goes in here, I need to put a SIM card in to connect up to the cellular network. Then what do? I've got a controller that's only talking Wi-Fi. Now I need another dongle for the controller. So I've got two dongles, one on the controller that's talking to the cellular network, one on the drone that's talking to the cellular network. The technology's rock solid. I'm sure it works brilliantly. And again, it's available in other countries. The challenge I've got with it though is There's a big controversy in the States right now about visual line of sight. I know there's opinions on both sides. Why can't I fly further than I can see the drone? Why do we have this goofy visual line of sight requirement? I've got an entire clip that discusses that. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a fan of visual line of sight requirements today because the drone technology doesn't protect you from crashing into a plane. And when you're flying your drone, if you think about it, it's like you have blinders on. At best, when you're flying a drone, you've got maybe a 90, or if you're lucky, 100, 120 degree view of what's in front of you, which means 300% of the sky or 200% of the sky is completely blind to you. There could be a plane coming from the side, helicopter coming from behind, helicopter coming from above. You won't see any of that stuff. All you see what's in front of you, which again, when I see some of these people flying these drones for 11 miles trying to get to the ends of distance with it and doing distance testing, I get so frustrated because I'm thinking, you have no awareness of where the planes are around you. You can have somebody smack into you and here we go. The whole hobby's going to suffer from that. So the beyond visual line of sight concept is something I'm a big fan of. I think it's coming. But I think the features that the drone's going to need to enable that beyond visual line of sight flight are things like detect and avoid. So if the drone, like this is a feature inside of it that'll let me know if there's airplanes in the area, that feature could easily react to those airplanes, bring the drone down because of crash avoidance below 50 feet, so the plane's not going to be a problem for me. That's not in there yet. I'm not saying it can't be. That's a programming thing that DJI could definitely build into it, but before beyond visual line of sight becomes a real thing for consumer drones like this or even commercial drones, those kind of technologies need to be in there. So you need to be able to read ADS-B signals from other planes and know there are planes in the area that you might crash into and then, go down to 50 feet or whatever. So I'm getting a little bit outside myself here. What I'm getting at, I guess, is because you can do it, doesn't mean you should do it. So giving me extra distance with the cost and the complexity, and not to mention the cellular cost of connecting to those networks, doesn't make a lot of sense to me today because I fly within visual line of sight requirements. I can get out about 3,000, 3,500 feet with a beacon at the top of the drone. That's as far as I need to fly. And when the drone is ready, when the technology's been updated, when it's smart enough to avoid planes and helicopters and all those things that may be lurking out there beyond visual line of sight, I'll fly beyond visual line of sight. But today I've got to stay within visual line of sight. That isn't the case in other countries. There may be countries you fly in where you can fly to your heart's content as far away as you want. Or if you're in an area, in the outback in Australia, we're not going to really hit anything because there's not a lot of aircraft, maybe you do fly beyond visual line of sight. But here in the States, from a regulatory perspective, we're limited to visual line of sight flight. Putting a dongle in here that would let this thing fly essentially, 46 minutes away, that could be miles away before the battery dies, puts me at risk of crashing into something. So I say from a regulatory perspective, I don't think they're going to allow it until the technology matures enough to make the drone smart enough to avoid anything that's up in the air. Then there's also the cost of it. And that to me, even if I could do it, I don't want to spend the money to fly that far. Now, you might argue that you've had some issues with connection technologies in close. I know a lot of people complain that, if they're flying in an environment that's crowded, there's a lot of Wi-Fi interference, that they may have connection issues with the drone. Honestly, I fly pretty much every drone that's been released in the last 10 years. I've rarely had connection issues. The only time I really have connection issues, really two times, are if I fly behind a stand of trees, and I've talked about this before in the channel. Most people don't realize, but trees are 90% water. Water blocks radio signals. Now, it wouldn't seem like if you drop down behind a stand of trees that it would affect your signal, but that's going to shut it off like instantaneously. So that's the first place you can get into trouble. The second place I've had issues is if there's a lot of other broadcasts in the area that are high powered. And where does that happen? Around radio towers. So if you're flying near a radio tower, you may fly fine for most of it, and you'll find that one point, or maybe at that 1 second, when the tower is broadcasting, that it'll override the signal from your controller and you could have issues. So in those two scenarios, I get that maybe connection issues could be a problem, but in large part, the OcuSync technology from DJI, I'm telling you, it's like Martian technology. They developed a transmission topology that frequency hops between frequencies to guarantee a rock solid signal. It's also watching for the next strongest signal to jump to in case that one gets busy. You're not going to have a problem with connection technology. But the fact that they designed this into the drone tells me other places in the world those dongles are permitted, and they're using that connection to the cellular network to communicate with the controller. Again, in the States, it's not still available. It also requires, in those other countries, a subscription from DJI to use that technology. It isn't available here yet, and I don't know when it'll be available here, but I wanted to make you aware of it because up until now, If you had the Mini 3 Pro, you had the Mavic 3, you could buy an external dongle that you could attach to the drone, and DJI even makes attachment kits, but it's an extra thing you got to add, and then the controller's got to have one. This is the first time they've actually designed it that I know of inside the drone. Now, I haven't taken the Mavic 3 apart yet. I've got a brand new Mavic 3 that I'll be tearing open in a couple of days. I'll look and see if there's another cavity there, but this, to me, this little cavity right there, means that they've spent quite a bit of time and treasure designing this to handle that dongle, and have decided in the US not to release it. Again, regulatory, cost, political. I don't want to get into the political side of it. I've done clips on this nonsense that's going around about China spying through drones for China. It's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. It's politically motivated. It has everything to do with protectionism and nothing to do with security. I'm going to do another clip on that very soon. I know that's a controversial issue because people like pounding on China. I promise you, there is no reasonable data that's being collected from a drone that helps China in any way. So that's nonsense. But politically, can you imagine if all of a sudden DJI announced a connection to the cellular network from their drones? People's minds would, expand and go, well, there you go, they're spying over the network. So the political aspects of it, the regulatory aspects of it really make this kind of a hot potato right now. So it's in there. You can take the cover off if you want. You'll see the same cavity. You'll see the two antenna connections and the USB-C connection in the back. My suggestion is keep your powder dry. I think this is going to be something you're going to see. Maybe it'll be approved in the US, then you can pop a dongle in there and you can fly it over the cellular network if you want. But for now, it's not available. But I wanted to make you aware of it because for me, I'm always looking at what's next. What's the next technology? And I think if you go back 4 years on the channel, you'll find a clip where I talked about future connection technology being based on the cellular network. And I thought that was definitely something that would be coming. Turns out here it is. It's ready to rock and roll. So that's all I really had for today. What I'm hoping with this clip is that I spawned some conversations and some critical thinking about the future of drones, where they're going. If you want to flame up the channel and talk about visual line of sight, drop those comments below. We can have a conversation about that. I promise you I have another clip coming talking about things like remote ID, beyond visual line of sight flight, all the things that are somewhat controversial in our hobby. I think it's a really healthy thing to have a conversation about those issues. And we may not agree on everything, we may not agree on anything, but I'd like to get those out there to have a conversation so that at least we can understand each other a little bit better and try to find some common ground that just makes sense for all of us. But anyway, that's all I had for today. I thought that was really cool, and I wanted to get it up on the channel and talk about it because the fact that they designed it into the Air 3, to me, indicates this is a hot feature you're going to see coming on a lot of drones from DJI. And again, they were first with a lot of features. As far as I know, they're the first one in the consumer space to do this as well. So that's all I really had for today. Thanks an awful lot for watching. I hope you're enjoying these clips. I've got so much more technology we're going to be covering on the channel. So if you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button down there and join the Drone Valley family because we got a lot of contests and cool things coming up this year. And that's pretty much it. So thanks a lot for watching. And until next time, as always, happy flying.